Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Tresle webinar. My name is Joel Keeler. I'm the CEO of Tresle. I have a very exciting presentation for you today. If you think it's a challenge to run a family business, try exiting one. Deciding to transfer control of a family business can put owners in a tough spot with multiple variables to consider, deep-rooted relationships, and personal ties. It makes the transition emotional and has a psychological impact on the family, the business's employees, and ultimately the business itself. So today we're going to be discussing everything to do with exiting a family business, how to manage communication, where things can go off the rails, and much more. The format will be an interview with our guests, and then we'll transition to a little Q&A with questions that were pre-submitted via social media. Thank you to everybody that did so. And then we will follow with a brief close. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Craig Aronoff, co-founder and senior advisor at the Family Business Consulting Group, where he and his team work with clients around topics around family and business, governance, generational transitions, decision-making, conflict resolution, and much more. Having worked with over 300 families across the globe, Craig is no doubt amongst the most noteworthy consultants, speakers, and educators in the family business field. Family Capital named him one of the top 100 most influential people in the world of family enterprise. He holds a PhD from the University of Texas at Austin and is co-founder of the renowned Cox Family Enterprise Center at Kennesaw University, where he serves as professor emeritus. His work in academia has also served as a model for over 150 universities worldwide. That was a mouthful. Safe to say that we're in great hands for this topic. Thank you so much for joining us today, Craig.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. So, we covered the background, albeit at a high level, I'm sure. But maybe you could tell me how you got started with family enterprise consulting.
Well, I in a way, I was born into it. I was born into a family-owned business, a small family-owned business, and grew up with it and had all the experiences of that throughout my life. I mean, I have memories going back to before I was 5 years old of what was going on in the family business and with the family. I was the oldest son. It was my father it was a wholesale clothing business. And my father always told me that we were middlemen and that the world wanted to get rid of middlemen. And someday his business was going to end. He didn't know how or when or exactly who was going to put him out of business, but it wouldn't go on forever. And I took that to mean that he was telling me that I ought to find something else to do. My younger brother went into the family business and went down with it when my father's prognostications actually came true. I was pretty good in school and enjoyed it and found myself at Northwestern University undergraduate. And I looked around and I said, these college professors have a pretty good life. So I decided to do that. And I wound up as a business professor, amused the hell out of my father, who said, those who can do and those who can't teach. But that was the kind of relationship that we had. And I looked around being in the business school, and this was 1975. And I realized that we paid absolutely no attention to family businesses in essentially in any courses. It's different today that we taught in the business school. And that our assumption basically was that every one of our students needed to be prepared to be the CEO of General Electric someday. And zero of them actually ended up in that position, which given to what's happened to General Electric lately, maybe that was a good thing too. So I began to think about, shouldn't we be teaching family business? And after I was at Georgia State for 8 years, then I went to Kennesaw State, where I held their first endowed chair and got a lot of freedom and was able to direct my energies toward education for family business. I was doing what professors do, which is if you don't publish, you perish. So I was publishing tremendously on the subject of family business and set up this program for family businesses. We're now in the mid-'80s. And and it took off. There was a tremendous demand for our educational programs. We were very successful. We, meaning myself and John Ward, who was my co-founder and partner in crime and all of these sorts of things. He was at Loyola of Chicago at the time, was later at Northwestern's Kellogg School. And we got a reputation for knowing something about family business. And people would come up and say, we've got this business and we've got these circumstances. Can you help us out? Or they'd come up and we might give a speech and they'd say, well, it was like you were under my breakfast table this morning when we were having an argument about the business. So increasingly folks asked me, and I was still a full professor at the time, but asked me to be involved in their businesses, with their businesses, and consulting with them. Ultimately, the demand for my services and for John Ward's services became so great that we felt like we had to find some other people who would approach family businesses with the same respect, with the same depth and unconflicted commitment that we felt was appropriate to bring to these family businesses. And we began the Family Business Consulting Group in 1994. At the same time, the field was starting to grow. There was something called the Family Firm Institute, which started in '87. I was its third president. And a lot of different people started calling themselves family business consultants. And some of them were selling insurance. And some of them were M&A types who would come in and say, you better sell this thing before you run it with your family, and we can sell it for you. Some of them were psychologists who didn't know much about business. Some of them were accountants who knew nothing about psychology. And it was our approach that we dealt with the family and the business simultaneously, which meant having very good understanding of what the business was all about and a very good understanding of the dynamics of the family at the same time. And so today, I'm on the downstroke. Senior advisor means I've stepped aside as chairman of our company. I've stepped off the board of our company. And by the way, we ate our own cooking and had a terrific succession transfer process, which is allowing John to have exited already and me to exit in time, with a solid board in place, with excellent management in place, with a good ownership group. They're not our children, but we think of it in terms of generations. So the second generation of the Family Business Consulting Group is now very well in place. And I happily do the consulting I like to do and want to do, and I'm called to do by my clients. So it's been a wonderful ride trying to help family businesses with their issues, many of which related to generational transitions, successions, or in your words, exits.
Amazing. And thank you for that background. And it's absolutely true. I mean, it's really a different skill set in terms of bringing that, to academia, right? Versus, that path towards upper management in corporate America versus the skill sets and, personal ties that are involved in naturally in family businesses, which affect so many people across the country. So yeah, that's amazing. And thank you for that.
Yeah, when the statistics began to be collected, and we collected a lot of them ourselves, but people always used to say, why do you want to work with family businesses, particularly my peer professors at the business school? And I finally said, well, they're a niche that is actually comprised of half of our economy, and they're terribly underserved. So from a business perspective or a strategic perspective, it certainly makes sense to recognize this particular market, this niche, and to serve it. And there's tremendous variety, obviously, within the huge number of family businesses that are out there.
Yeah, amazing. So in kind of your eyes, what makes family enterprises great and unique from other companies?
Well, those are good questions. This may sound strange, but it's a perspective that goes beyond economics. So what we find is that successful family business owners, particularly those that are able to do it for more than one generation, for multiple generations, are those that think of their businesses as something more than businesses. They usually see it as a living thing, an organism, and that needs care and that needs attention, and to which they need to be committed for its life, for its health, for its growth, in ways that folks who are starting a business, growing a business, and selling a business, or buying a business and selling a business, or buying stock in some small ownership part of a major business, don't think at all in those ways. So and that leads to very long-term perspective. Most of the time when that question is asked, the answer is family businesses have a long-term perspective, where public businesses manage from quarter to quarter. And those may or may not be true in any given case. But the long-term perspective comes out of this notion, or this perspective that says, this is a living organism and I want to keep it alive. And it has the capacity to grow, to live and to grow for many, many years. And there's that old saying that came out of England from a long time ago, if you keep your shop will keep you. And the notion is, if we can take care of this organism that we've created, it'll take care of us. And what's good for it is good for us. And that's a very different perspective than one that says, let's get everything we can out of this thing for as long as it'll run, and then let's dump it, or let's sell it to somebody else and take advantage of the wealth, of the money, the wealth that it created.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you touch on an important point, which is entrepreneurship and business creation, which, across the United States continues to be kind of a major path to wealth creation for families. And you work a lot alongside many business owners and managing their affairs. So what would you say are kind of some of the most common drivers behind the sale of a multi-generational family business?
Well, first, let's be clear. The incidence of entrepreneurship in our country has been going down for about 25 years. And we have somewhere between half and 70% of the businesses being started today than were started 20 years ago or 25 years ago. So entrepreneurship, although I know many young people who say, oh, I want to work for a startup, they're usually looking for somebody else's startup that they can work with, as opposed to starting it up themselves. So that's declined. A lot of that entrepreneurship is driven by people who come to our shores, immigrants. And if you think about every dry cleaner or if you know people that own small roadside motels, or if you know people that own Mexican restaurants, or on and on and on, you will find groups of immigrants. I come from a Jewish family, and a wave of Eastern European Jews hit our shores around the beginning of the 20th century, and a huge amount of them got involved in businesses of their own. And in many cases, for these immigrants, that's their best choice. It's hard to find jobs, or they have language issues or other things that keep them from joining larger, more established organizations. So entrepreneurship has been and is a way in and a way up in our economy and in our society. Now, in some cases, the big competitive advantage of these restaurants or laundries or other things are that you're willing to work 6.5 days a week hard on your feet. And so you may have heard the phrase somewhere, better you should be a doctor. It was better you should be a doctor than what? Better you should be a doctor than have to work in the family business and work your butt off. Instead, become a professional, become respected, have a more secure income, more secure benefits, and things of that nature. But for some, then it's time to sell, because the kids have gotten educated and they've gone off and gotten interested in other things. And sometimes it's not just one Mexican restaurant. I now have 20, or I brought my entire town from Mexico to come and help us run the Mexican restaurants. And I've created something of value that really will live beyond and provide for lots of people. And so that's a long way of getting around saying, to me, what will create a situation where a multi-generational family business is being sold, and I've been involved with 2 of those in the last week, very substantial ones, where it is when there's a determination that somebody else could be a better owner of this enterprise than we are, and they're willing to pay for it. So literally, ownership is the key here, and we'll talk later about how ownership and management slowly become separate matters. But particularly as ownership is seen as a separate matter, you can conceive of a business having a value, you can conceive of building a value, and you conceive of a situation in which you and or your progeny, your children, your offspring, may not be the ones to carry this forward, and somebody else would be better, and they're willing to give us a lot of security, liquidity, and a kind of different lifestyle in order to have that privilege.
And how should folks kind of, you use the word determination, how should folks, I guess, start this conversation or process, or where do people even start? So let's say they've created this, doesn't matter what type of business, this, 20 location restaurant, for example, is just what we were talking about. And they kind of, I'm sure that a lot of the times the kids are involved in the business in some fashion. How do they kind of start that conversation and process overall?
Well, first of all, and I run into this a lot with people who aren't that genuinely familiar with the working of family businesses. And they sort of assume what you want to, the greatest goal is to take something public. By the way, the number of public companies in our country is also in the decline. And people, and most family business owners of substantial family businesses will tell you the last thing they want to do is go public, because then they lose their freedom, they lose their flexibility. They're spending a lot of time dealing with regulations of either the markets or the government, and they don't find, and they are disheartened by working in that kind of environment. So you don't start with for most and sort of traditional entrepreneurs in many cases are seen as starting a business to grow it and sell it. So we're in neither one of those cases. There's not an assumption when you start out that we're going to sell it, either publicly or to somebody else.
Yeah.
So you see the evolution of your business, you see where it's going, you set goals for where you want it to go, and you think very hard about what your options are. If I can take the case of our consulting firm, we now have 26 consultants and 8 staff. We have a nice revenue. We have a nice profitability. And we've had on several occasions offers from very substantial professional service firms to buy us out. We, meaning the owners, this was initially there were 2 owners, now there are 7 or 8, and there's a process by which we create ownership succession. The owners all treasure our independence, and one of the main ideas that we focus on is that we are independent. We can serve our clients in an unconflicted manner because we're not being pressured by anything else other than their needs and fulfilling their needs. So our board, all of whom were owners, made a determination that we want to stay independent. We said, okay, how do you stay independent? Well, you stay independent by creating circumstances so that there can be transition within the organization. And so there can be exits, again, to use your word, among those who are aging out, if you will, and pay them appropriately for their ownership, but still keep the culture, still keep the organization, and sustain the organization in and of itself. We recognized about 10 years before our big transition that at a certain time, a large number of our early participants and certainly our founders were going to be leaving, and we needed to plan for that. And we literally took, I would say, at least 8 years to map out how it would be that we would have a succession of owners and therefore a succession of directors to provide oversight for it. We intentionally recruited some great younger people who had the potential to grow up and be the managing, what we call them were managing principals, the CEO of our company. And so we were able to develop 2 or 3 people who we could consider, one of whom we ultimately chose, after we decided that we were not going to go outside for a search because we didn't need to be. And so we carefully said, how do we have successor ownership? How do we have successor management? How do we keep a viable strategy to keep this business going? And we did those things. Yeah. And I'm shocked that we were as successful as we were, frankly, because we knew the theory, but now we had to really practice it and make it work. So very early on, you're making decisions like, how are we going to handle the transfer of ownership? And many family businesses see it, it's not a failure, but they see it as a failure if they can't continue the business in their family because there's no way that the ownership is there to move forward. People haven't developed the skills and the knowledge and the attitudes and the values to be good owners, which is often to say, create good boards of directors who can provide appropriate insight and oversight, that they haven't developed the appropriate management, and management may be family members or may not be family members, that we haven't evolved our strategy to keep it viable and relevant despite changes in the marketplace, changes in technology, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a big decision that says, not only are we trying to make a living today, not only are we trying to create value today, but we're looking at the future and we're planning and very purposefully and making decisions and taking actions very purposely to give us, and I often say this to my clients, we're going to give you the maximum degrees of freedom. If you decide you want to sell this thing, we want the value to be there that somebody else wants to buy it. Mm-hmm. If you decide to keep this thing, but don't think your children are the appropriate people to be the CEO, the top management, we're going to focus on having the kind of management team, family and non-family, or being an attractive enough organization to recruit the appropriate management team to keep the business going if you want it to keep going. And we're going to work on our family, the owners of this business, to assure that they have alignment, that they share their goals, and that they have cohesiveness. They want to stick together, and they really understand the values that relate to how do we keep this thing going. So you set it up. Frequently, if you're an entrepreneur and you want to sell it, fine. Set it up. The advice I've heard given and I've given is think about who the ultimate owner of your business would be. Do everything you can to make it attractive and valuable to that person and sell it to them. It's easy. It's harder to keep it. And doing all the things that I just listed to keep it takes a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of commitment. And yet, obviously, it's done in the best of cases.
Yeah, and you mentioned alignment, and I'm sure it's not always smooth sailing. So, in your experience, is there ever friction between families, next generations, when kind of everybody's, let's say, not on the same terms and same page in terms of the vision forward?
And you know the answer to that. The answer is, of course. We're dealing with human beings here. In all their scattered glory. So again, I would first say it takes a lot of work to achieve alignment. So, is your attitude going to be, let's find a way to do this together? A lot of times when you look at stupid television shows like Succession, which obviously is a comedy, which I don't find funny at all from my perspective, or these, it was always, I got to get one more vote in the boardroom. I'm going to outvote you, and then I'm going to fire you as CEO, and then we're going to do what we want to do with the business. Yeah. It doesn't work that way. Or if it does work that way, you're already beat. I mean, it's done. It works on developing a clear vision of where you want to go, clear values about how you're going to run your business. We talk about vision, values, mission, all those kind of good things. That's all great. But it means really spending time determining what you're going to be aligned about and then working to get it. So you do that with your employees. You do that with your ownership group. You do that with your assuming the ownership group is the family. You do it with the family. So you don't just assume, hey, I'm the boss and I'm going to go ahead and it's going to be what it's going to be. And someday, if you're lucky enough, if you fight hard enough and take care of your brother. You can be in my place. That is really not, I mean, that those circumstances go on. They're not the ones I'm involved in. What I'm involved in is figuring out how we can reach agreement, alignment. What are our goals? What are our values, et cetera. One, I mentioned I've been involved with 2 sales of substantial family businesses in the last week. I was on the phone with one this morning, and one of the 4 siblings of the 3rd generation said, we've been working with you for 30 years. And because we were working with you for 30 years, we were able to reach agreement and alignment. We understood what we wanted to do. We understood why we needed to do it. It certainly wasn't what we were brought up to do, meaning selling the business. But they got into a situation where they had a very substantial business. And it was one of these situations where their industry was consolidated. And they really had a choice. Either we've got to buy up others in large scale, or we got to be bought. And if we're going to buy up others, it's going to be greater risk. It's going to be greater debt. It's going to be less money available for our lives and our security and for our children. And there are others out there that were willing to compete to buy our business from us. And we made the decision. And 15 years ago, they'd made a decision not to be bought. Now that they're 5 or 6 times the size of what they were then. They made the decision to be bought. And he said, if we had been working with you for the last 30 years, and I don't think I'm not saying this is always necessary, but that was the way that they sought to align themselves, to recognize their values, and they were able to make a decision, including what the appropriate price and terms were. And we'll be having meetings next month about, well, now that we no longer have this business, what does it mean to be the family that we are? And what do we anticipate doing with our wealth? So they're going to keep doing what they were doing on the family side, because it led to peace and harmony and love and wonderful relationships with each other, even though they're not doing it on the business side. So it's underappreciated. Although if you go to church on Sunday or synagogue on Friday or Saturday, it mostly is the kind of things that they're preaching there about respecting each other, about working things out, about understanding some people have different views. The other thing, if there are major differences, you can always buy people out. So if not everybody is fitting together, it's a problem to solve. It's not let's fight each other and beat each other to a pulp and let the lawyers go away with all the money. It's we have a problem here. I was working with one family. I had worked with them some years before. They called me back in. They said, we're feeling kind of funny about things. We're not sure what's going on. How about checking it out? And I did, interviewed a whole bunch of owners, came back and said, at least 40% of your people want to be bought out. Why do they want to be bought out? Because they feel like the business is in an area where the risk is greater than they want to take. They feel like the business has been successful enough so that they will have achieved their goals for the wealth that they want to have, if they can get that in a liquid form. And so, they're ready to go. And if 40% of your people want to go, I would suggest to you that you figure out a way to do it. And the 60% that wanted to stay, interestingly enough, they could have sold the whole thing, split up the money, and that would have worked. But they said, no, this is great. We're doing an important thing here. We want to keep doing it. And it took them between 2 and 3 years to figure out the mechanics of how to buy out the other 40% at a fair price and have sufficient capitalization to continue toward their goals together with the remaining group, which was the majority. I mean, one group could have forced the other group to do something, but there'd be lawsuits and all sorts of other things that would keep them from paying attention to what they needed to. So it's okay if somebody wants to go, or it's okay if somebody needs to go. And you need to think through your whole capital structure, the availability of liquidity. You have shareholders agreements that talk about how the company will be valued under various circumstances. And if somebody is not aligned, doesn't want to get aligned, you can say, okay, fine. You can have your money. Hope you're happy. We can still be friends. We can still be cousins, whatever we are. And the rest of us are going to go forward with the mission and the vision and the values that we've been having. So it's a matter, it's a matter of taking the time and having the inclination and caring enough, and really caring enough about each other to say, we can find a way to solve these problems. They won't always be the way that maybe I or you want it to work out. And one of the ways to do that is sell the company. Another way to do that is buy out some. Another way to do that is say, come on back. Well, in one case, it was, again, the question was, we feel like we're overly exposed and there's too much risk because basically our entire portfolio is in this one substantial growing business that was requiring our money. We were becoming wealthier. It was all on paper because the money was required to continue to grow the business.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and that happens, but so I'm compared to 25 years ago, diversity is not just a word about the ethnic makeup of your board. Diversification is a sound economic concept that says, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Let's go into some other areas. So companies are becoming more diversified, or they're paying out distributions so that individuals can take that money, invest it as they see fit, and they can become personally diversified.
Yeah.
Okay. And all that's fine. And which solution is not the right solution. The right solution is what works. And whether it's going to work or not is essentially a matter of whether you, the owners, are willing to do what you need to do or get the help that you need to get to find the way through.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I guess switching gears here just a little bit, in your experience, do people, I don't mean you per se, but people in the folks that you serve consider ownership a birthright?
I would say there's some that do. I would say that would be, for most of the families I work with, that attitude would be seen as a problem because they see ownership as a responsibility. And I'm not sure birthright and responsibility, maybe if the birthright includes responsibility, that would be the case. I see lots of these shareholders agreements, which are written primarily to control who gets to own shares, which say ownership of shares will be restricted to the lineal descendants of Mr. and Mrs. XYZ. Mm-hmm. So it's them and all their children and all their progeny forever, and nobody else. That certainly sounds like a birthright. And that certainly sounds like we're going to be somehow better off if only people with our DNA wind up being the owners. And I will tell you that there's some correlation. It's usually not with DNA. It's usually with how you raise your kids and what your values are. Mm-hmm. So the assumption may be, our family will be raising its children right, so they'll be prepared to work and do what they need to do. And then I've seen situations, and these get really tangled up, where the stock is restricted to lineal descendants who are working in the business or in executive roles in the business. Yeah. So the family members that are not working in the business don't get any shares. And sometimes they get other kinds of assets. And those who are working in the business get all the shares. Yeah, and that was kind of my follow-up. So if it is, a birthright, call it, how does one distinguish between differing levels of contribution to the business? So reaching, being in or versus out, for example. Yeah. Well, the first thing is making a distinction between ownership and management. So, the entrepreneur says, I own this business, therefore I run this business, therefore I do what I want to with this business. By the second or third generation, it may be, we own this business. We have a responsibility to get the best possible management. We have a responsibility to provide a board of directors to assure accountability and oversight for that management. And if I happen to be very skilled or knowledgeable or intelligent as it relates to running a business, that's who we ought to have in there, not somebody else that, just because they're a family member gets to lead the company. The other problem is if you pile up all the shares in the few people in a family that own the business, they're going to start getting tremendous stakes. I was working with a business that had about 50 shareholders, kind of equal. The way you reward people for the work that they do is you pay them, and you pay them salary, and you pay them bonuses, and you might even pay them some kind of stock option or some substitute for stock that's going to increase in value as the company. So you reward them for the great job, for their job they're doing and the great job they're doing, but the owners own. And the owners get rewarded because they have their money tied up in the stock, therefore they're at risk. And they're going to get rewarded through increased value of their shares, which can also be a problem if you can't get to that increased value, or through some kind of distributions or dividends on your shares. And the folks that are running the business over here should be very happy that they've got 50 family members that are willing to keep their money invested in the business, because that gives them the capital they need to run their business. And these guys ought to be really happy that they've got a relative or a non-relative who's really great at running the business. So I was up there talking to this group of 50 shareholders with a history going from their first generation to their second generation, where an offspring of two of the founding brothers and the brothers themselves were at war with each other about who would be the next CEO. And this was a big company, a famous company, and they were tearing each other apart. And finally, it was resolved by one of the branches of the family being bought out. So, but they were scared to death that these kind of conflicts would occur again. And so the guy raised his hand and said, well, the more family members you get, the worse it may become. And I said, well, actually, it's just the opposite. He said, why? I said, well, if there's 2 or 3 of you or 4 of you, then one of you gets upset and represents a quarter or a third or a half of the ownership, which you'd have to buy out, which would probably sink your company in terms of its capital structure. If there's 50 of you and somebody gets upset, you got 2% you have to buy out. It's really not that hard,
Yeah.
So there's more complexity in many ways if you have a lot of them.
Sure.
But there's less risk because they own such a smaller piece of the company that you can afford to say, hey, we love you. We know we're not running this the way you want it run. You own 2%. Here's your 2% or whatever it is.
Sure.
Go start your own business, do whatever you want to do, and we'll see you at Thanksgiving. But you got to separate the notion of ownership and family. And these folks that say only the owners should run the business, they should get all the rewards, really gets difficult when it comes time for transitions. Because now, what if I don't have any good people in the next generation coming up? What do we do? Exactly. I had one client some years ago, and they called me and they said, we're having trouble with succession. We're an older family business. We're going from our 3rd or our 4th generation to our 4th or 5th. We have 5 candidates for CEO. They're all family members. And our 20-person board, all of whom are family members, can't decide among the 5 who ought to be the successor. Won't you come and help us out? I'm going, this one's complicated.
Yeah.
And I went in and I talked to him. And, it was 4 branches of the family. And the 5 candidates were the youngest member of the 3rd generation and a representative of each of the 4 branches. And so I interviewed each of those 5 guys, and they didn't say it this way, but effectively what they said was, well, we've always had family members to be the leaders of our company. So it's going to be a family member who leads our company. And I think compared to the other guys that are being considered here, I'm probably, they would say the best, but what they were really saying was, I'm the least worst. And a family member is going to wind up as CEO. And I went to them and I said, you've got a governance problem, you've got a succession problem, and your number one problem right now is this expectation that it's going to be a family member. And in fact, their CFO, who was non-family, had tremendous respect in the business. And he wound up, we ended up tearing down their board and rebuilding it with family and independent directors and key executives. And then they actually determined that the CFO should be the CEO, non-family. And ultimately, he wound up as chairman, not owning stock, but because he was the best person to do it.
Yeah.
So that's the key, is to make that separation and then be careful about the structures that you built and the assumptions that those structures are built on.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up management, which I think is interesting. So kind of looking at, let's say, maybe smaller companies that don't have, the 20-person board or anything like that, but just, and I'm going to paint a picture of just a company that, let's say, mom and dad own, so to speak, mom and pop shop. When transitioning to, say, for example, like a third party selling the business, a lot of next gens are working in these businesses out of a sense of duty and obligation. So I guess, is there potential for friction, and how is that managed with having kind of a new third party non-family member coming in?
Well, once again, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So first of all, I would urge those parents to say to their kids, we want you to figure out what you're best at and what you're happy with and what's going to give you the best life. Please do not feel an obligation to come into this business. Now, there are cases where, we're short on cash. We need cheap labor. You're 16 now. Get in here and work.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a different level. It exists. Yes. But if it's, we expect all the family to be in here together, and I think it's a really bad idea. And what you want are the people who want to be there. Well, I'll make it even worse. If you say to all your kids, you'll always have a job in the family business, there's a high likelihood that the best of your kids are going to wind up working somewhere else, and the worst of your kids are going to take an easy route and take a job in the family business. And you almost assure that transition will and succession will not successfully happen, because you're not getting the raw material in there to lead the business later on.
Yeah.
So a lot of the notions you come with about family business, that the family business owners come with, really turn out to be dangerous. So I remember, and again, this was a reasonably substantial business, but the family members were incentivized like crazy to come into the business, and they were 14 or 16, and the business was beginning to have real problems, and they were fighting with each other, and there was no good structure for dealing with those things, and ultimately they had to sell the business because they couldn't run the business. And then they were shocked. I think there were 16 family members in the business when the owner said, you can stay in the business, the rest of y'all go out, you got your money now, go find yourself a job. So, I mean, if they're not doing a good job, or if they're just there because they're family, the owner will get rid of them. And if he doesn't, then it's not going to work, or she doesn't, it's not going to work well for them. So you should have a job because you're good at it. You should have a job because you're contributing. I consistently suggest to families that they set up policies that say you cannot come into the business straight out of school. You have to go out and get experience. It can't be superficial experience. One of my favorite is you have to go out and get 2 promotions somewhere else before we'll consider you in our family business. And then if you really want to come back, great. And when you come back, I bet you'll be contributing from day one, instead of having this long period of time when everybody sees you as the owner's kid and laughs at you behind their back. And even when you're older, some of the folks are going to be saying, well, he had the silver spoon, that's why he's here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Last couple questions before we transition to the few social media questions that were submitted. So obviously, COVID has changed many aspects of our lives. How has it, if it has, changed the way that family business owners approach succession planning? Have you seen some sort of maybe accelerated sense of urgency or awakening or anything like that?
Yeah, first of all, we're still in COVID.
Sure.
And the effects of it have yet to be really worked through.
Of course. Yeah.
I think we're all reminded that there are potential disasters out there waiting for us, and that we need to manage our businesses in ways that will allow them to continue to function, if not prosper, when a disaster hits. And, whether that's a recession or a depression or a war or a change in regulations, you think about the oil industry and the automobile industry adapting to EV, electric vehicles.
Yeah.
And Ford, a family business, and GM and many others are, really, really going at it. And the energy industries are all trying to figure out what are we going to be in the future. But it's been like, bam, wake up and realize this can happen, and make your plans accordingly. That's not just about succession. I know a couple of older generation folks that say, take it. I don't want to do this anymore. I've had it. I don't think that's the common ground. A lot of them, we always talk about the being hit by a bus or being hit by a truck, which is to say we need to have emergency succession plans, even if somebody's relatively young. I think more of them are taking that more seriously now because, they see that the truck or the bus could be disease. And I think that the world is flush with cash right now, which is bizarre under the circumstances. But I think that that businesses, when they saw this happening, said, we've got to adjust ourselves. And what I saw in most cases was, and this would have been in the summer of 20, after it hit in March of 20, where they were making new budgets and tightening up on overhead and saying, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen to our revenue. So we've really got to, get ready for the storm. But that was more financial and operational in a lot of cases than it was in terms of accelerating the change of leadership.
Okay, awesome. And last question here before we transition into the few social media prompts. The leading edge of the baby boomers are 75 years old now, and they're kind of, to what you alluded to, of entrepreneurship.
Careful here now. I'm not 75. I'm only 7.
Yeah, I didn't say.
I'm in there. Go ahead.
I didn't say anything. They're business owners in record numbers. So how do you see the next 10 to 15 years playing out?
Again, we're seeing a lower level of entrepreneurship than we did 20 or 30 years ago when the baby boomers were at their height. I think we've seen a lot of shakeout already because of changes. The nature of retail has changed tremendously.
Sure.
And it's happened and it continues to happen. So there's been a lot of shakeout already. And a lot of changes already that folks have had to deal with. And the ones that are still standing and adapted as they've needed to, I think I've seen financial sophistication of business owners increase tremendously over my career. Nobody had an MBA 30 years ago. So there's a lot more preparation, a lot more understanding. And I think a greater sensitivity to getting the next generation involved, if it's to be the next generation, or to make decisions about what we're going to do if it's not going to be the next generation. So I'm seeing, when I started this game, private businesses didn't have independent directors on their boards.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing, if you go to say 100 million and up in terms of sales, I would think over 50% of private businesses now have independent directors on the boards, which is to say they're much stronger boards, which means those boards are pounding on their executives' heads going, what have you done in terms of succession planning? What have you done in terms of succession planning? What are our strategic alternatives? So I think there's more sensitivity, and I don't know if it's because the baby boomers getting older or not, but there's more sensitivity to those kind of issues that are related to good management, good ownership, and good planning related to transition, which is not to say there aren't still difficulties and problems. The demand for our services have gone up and up and up and up. And our problem, like everybody else in the country, is finding the right kind of labor, the people who can do this work. And they're not out there on street corners. But, the biggest issue I hear lately is we can't find enough people to work, which is not generational. and it is not succession oriented per se. But you never know what the issues are going to be. Who would have guessed, a year ago that you couldn't find work? There was 11.5% unemployment.
Yeah.
And now we can't find anybody to work. So there are huge surprises out there. And my advice is to plan everything you can so that you have less issues to deal with when the things that you can't plan actually come up and hit you squarely in the face, and have your best people available and best resources available to help you deal with it. So I think there's that kind of seriousness going on as it relates to those kind of businesses that are going to be able to sustain themselves.
Amazing. And this concludes the interview portion of our discussion. We're now just going to quickly transition. Out of the interest of time, we can't answer every single prompt that was submitted to us. So Craig, we do have a couple for you that were submitted. If you feel like they've been answered, we can kind of just maybe quickly do a summary of them out of respect of your time. So a contributor asked, how would you transition from a family-owned business to an employee-owned business? I'm assuming they mean by employee, right. They mean independent manager.
Yeah, even if some family members hung around, you could still be an employee-owned business.
Yeah, sure.
So that ESOPs, there's a lot more talk about ESOPs than there are ESOPs created, although an ESOP can be a very good alternative under the circumstances. And I've helped several families make that transition. You're not going to get the absolute highest value for your business if you go that route. If you just sold it, you're likely to get more cash out of it because it does need owner financing and the risk is still there.
Yeah.
But there are people who are committed to saying the best way to keep our family business going when we don't have family members who are in there is to put people in charge who share our values, who've grown up in our culture, and who approach the business the way we approach the business. And if that's what you're trying to do, and you want to reward your employees, then ESOPs are great. There's a lot. Go see a lawyer who specializes in ESOPs. So there are people who specialize in that, and those are the people to ask the question you're asking specifically to. But it's certainly not impossible. It's not a bad idea. Some family members can stay in. An ESOP becomes effective when the employees own at least 30% of the stock, so the family can still have a decent sized stake, and it can work out quite well.
Great, amazing, thank you. At Tegan Ray asks, I own a business with my brother. I want to retire and sell, and he wants to leave it to his kids. Mine are not interested. What's the best solution?
Your brother needs to buy you out at a fair price, and he's got to figure out how to finance that. And it's not a terribly unusual thing. I can think of a few situations like this where the brother who continued to own the business said, well, my brother's got all the money and I've got all the debt, but I've got the business. So I mean, that's the fairest way to resolve that sort of thing. If you go to war about it, you're going to wind up with possibly with nothing. So this is a problem that we need to solve together. How can we solve this problem fairly to both of us? And let's figure out the way to work it out. And you'll need advisors, and you'll need lawyers, and you'll need people you can borrow money from, probably. Or it can be a long-term payout. But if the guy who is willing to leave is willing to be paid out over 10 years, then maybe you can work out that way, or some combination of the above.
Okay, great. Last one here. At Armand_G asks, I have a multi-generational business and I feel I have a sense of obligation to continue this legacy. It's all we've ever known and it's our baby. How does one get over this potential sense of obligation and transfer it to a third party? I'm assuming they mean kind of getting over that emotional barrier to sell.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if this is an individual who's saying this, or if there's a group of cousins or siblings who are working through this, but it takes a lot of talking and thinking and recognizing. And again, I'd go back to what I said very early in the interview, which is if you want the legacy to continue, then it needs to have the best possible ownership. And if you are no longer the best possible ownership because you're not motivated to grow it, or because you're just tired, or you doubt yourself, you're afraid of the competition in the future, and somebody else is willing to undertake that, sometimes the best way to keep the legacy is actually to put it in hands that will be in better hands for sustaining that legacy than you do. But then it's not yours anymore. So you don't run it. You don't get to tell them what to do. And some people get over it. They have some money. They do what they want to do. Sometimes they, if the business is in a particular field or industry or community, they'll use some of the proceeds for philanthropic efforts in honoring those who went before. I worked with a business that was one of the oldest in the United States in terms of continuous ownership, and it was in a small town, and in the cemetery on a hill, all the ancestors were buried. And literally at board meetings, they would say the ancestors would vote this way. And I went through that with them, and one of the lines that I put in there high in their report was the ancestors should get a vote, but not a veto. So consider your legacy.
Yeah.
And those who passed it down to you, but don't let the legacy dictate, because that was the past, and you got to be dealing with the future for yourself and for your business. So give me a call. I can talk you through this. Maybe you'll feel better. Maybe you won't.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a beautiful way to end it. And that concludes the social media Q&A. Thank you to everybody that submitted a question. Although we couldn't get to each and every one of you, we appreciate, as always, your participation. I'd like to end, Craig, by seeing if there's any questions I neglected to ask, or if there's any messages you'd like to leave with the audience in general.
Well, we've written about 30 books on this subject, so you didn't ask all the questions, and you couldn't. One, I like to say to people, family business is not an excuse. Family business is not an excuse to run a less than excellent business, and a business is not an excuse to have less than an excellent family, and that's what you should be striving for. And when it works, it's a wonderful upward spiral where a good family creates a good business, which provides resources to make the family better, which can get more education and more resources to make the business better. And this can actually spiral upward over the generations, or it's the opposite. It's something goes wrong, you blame each other, you fight with each other, it affects the business, it gets worse, and it spirals downward. So you want to be on an upward spiral, and you want to be striving both to be the best family you can and the best business you can.
Wonderful. And thank you for that. And lastly, where can people find you or your company online?
It is THE, the word the, FBCG, Family Business Consulting Group, THEFBCG.com. And that's where you can find our website. And if you can find our website, you'll find me there. And if you press the right buttons, you'll find my telephone and address and all that good stuff. And we would love to hear from you.
Amazing. Well, Craig, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you carving out the time to provide some insight on this. Lastly, thank you for everybody, all the audience. If you're looking for more information around transitions, exits, etc., visit us, each of us, and I will attach this to the notes below at Tresle.com, or at the information that Craig just shared with us. Further, if you have any other suggestions for future topics we want to cover, drop us an email at hello@Tresle.com. Thank you, everybody, and take care.
Bye-bye.